is in a really precarious situation now. After completely eliminating the drought that had been plaguing their town for the last 2 books of this series, essentially, Morganville is in a place where it's very, very difficult to determine what is to happen. Amelie seems to be not quite herself, and everyone is starting to think that maybe Oliver, the other oldest vampire in this town, may have been gaining some kind of influence over her. Mirnan is thinking that things are going to literally go to shit and is planning on leaving town. Michael and Eve are dealing with some massive backlash after essentially running off and getting married without telling the founder. And the vampires and humans now are kind of in this weird war situation because of the fact that a vampire and a human have now gotten married. Claire is kind of in the middle of all of this, and when a mysterious crew comes into town that is claiming to essentially be ghost hunters, things start to really go awry because there's a lot of misconceptions about exactly what is going on in this town. Amelie keeps telling people that the vampires are going to be able to hunt again, which is something that Claire had thought had been eradicated from her mind, but it is clearly showing that things are not as they seem, and there is somebody behind the curtains pulling the strings that Claire is trying to find out how to stop. In the 13th installment of the Morganville Vampire series, Bitter Blood, we basically follow Claire and all the other characters involved in the story with multiple perspectives again, as they're trying to pick up the pieces of Morganville essentially after the Draug incident that had happened. To be completely honest, this installment of the series is another one of those lull points in the story because there's not really a lot that happens necessarily. There are some important aspects that are brought up and things that are really kind of divulged in terms of, in a sense, accentuating the plot, but for the majority of the story there's not really a lot that goes on because everyone is basically once again trying to pick up the pieces of the town after dealing with a massive hit to the town, just like with Bishop and just like with the tornado that went through the town in partway through the series, and now with the drought. I will say though that there are some things that are brought up in the story towards the end that do affect the way that the last 2 books of the series are going to go, so it's not necessarily no plot at all. There just doesn't seem to be much of it. One thing I will say is that when I first read this book, this was the book that I had thought about for years as being just a fairly normal book, but there was an element to the story that I thought had actually was supposed to happen way earlier in the series. Essentially, there's an element to the story where there is this crew that basically says that they are going to be ghost hunting in Morganville, and I remember specifically that there had been a point in the series where that happened, but for some reason I thought it was happening way earlier in the series, but it turns out that that element I thought that played on way early in the series was something very different and much more sinister. So this book is the one that actually has that element, and I was really excited to see it, but there wasn't really much of a point to it. I really feel like there was not much of a point of having these people here until like towards the very end of the book. It did bring about something that was very important in terms of the character development of one of the main characters, but I don't think that it necessarily should have been involved there because otherwise it didn't seem to have much of a point. I just feel like it was kind of unnecessary. In addition to that, there is a lot of hurt feelings from everybody in this book because things are said between different couples and things are really kind of heartbreaking in a lot of ways because of that, and I forgot how heartbreaking those moments were. Like, I remember feeling my heart actually like hurt because there were some points that I was like, no, this is not how this is supposed to happen. You guys are supposed to be happy, you're supposed to be okay, and it wasn't. But I will say that the end of the story actually kind of surprised me. I had almost completely forgotten something that happens to Claire that she decides at the very end of this book that does essentially affect where the beginning of book 14 ends up. I can't really say what that is though because it's gonna spoil the ending, but it is something that does get addressed very early on in the 14th book, so I think I'm just going to have to hold off until I do that review to say anything about it. But I totally forgot that this important thing that Claire decides happened, and I was a little shook. There was something that happened between Claire and Caine that I thought would detrimentally affect this decision, and it didn't. It was actually a little bit better than I thought it was going to be. So I don't know how I feel knowing that what I thought happened in this book didn't happen at all. I know I'm being so vague here and I don't have a lot to tell you guys, but This is one of those series where like I don't want to spoil a lot because they're not very long books by any means, and I feel like you just have to really experience them for yourself because each book has its own thing about it. I did give this book though a 4 to 5 stars because I still really enjoyed it. It wasn't bad by any means. I just don't think that there was enough that really happened, and I didn't in particular like the audiobook of this. I do not think that the audiobook was my best friend with this one, but I kind of had no other choice because I didn't have a copy of it like I thought I did, and my grandmother didn't have a copy of it, so I was kind of screwed. But anyway, if you guys did read this book yourself, please let me know what your thoughts were down in the comments below. I would love to know where you stand in terms of everything that's going on in the series, what your thoughts are, all that stuff. So, and if you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit the button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys.